Alexander Kuprin, the Jewish girl. We've passed them. We've asked them. A child's voice rang out plaintively. To the right. A gruff bass bellowed from behind. To the right, right. Others joined in from ahead, cheerful and hurried. Someone gnashed their teeth. Someone let out a piercing whistle. A pack of dogs erupted into a thin, vicious, yet joyful barking. Oh ho ho! Ha ha ha! The crowd laughed and groaned. The sleigh jolted and thudded against a frozen rut. Kashintsev opened his eyes. "What is it?" he asked with a start. But the road remained as deserted and silent as before. The frosty night held its breath over the endless, dead, white fields. A full moon hung in the center of the sky, and the sharp blue shadow gliding beside the sleigh, breaking against the churned-up snowdrifts, was short and grotesque. The resilient, dry snow creaked and shrieked under the runners like rubber. Ah, it's just the snow creaking, Kashintsev thought. How strange, he said aloud. Hearing the voice, the driver turned around. His dark face, with mustache and beard white from the frost, looked like a large, coarse animal mask plastered with cotton wool. "What's that?" "2 versts to go." "Not far now," the driver said. "It's the snow," Kashintsev thought, surrendering again to drowsiness. "It's only the snow. How strange. Strange. The bell at the end of the shaft suddenly began to babble, hurried and distinct. Strange Ly. Ay. Look at that, a woman shouted in front of the sleigh. The crowd, pressing toward her, suddenly began to speak all at once, weeping and singing. Again, with a vicious agitation, the dogs began to bark. Somewhere far off, a locomotive wailed, and immediately, through his slumber, Kashintsev remembered with extraordinary clarity the station buffet with its pathetic, dusty luxury, clusters of electric bulbs under a grimy ceiling and on stained walls, enormous windows, artificial palms on the tables, stiff standing napkins, nickel-silver vases, bouquets of dried grass, pyramids of bottles, and wine glasses of pink and green glass. That was yesterday evening. His fellow doctors were seeing off Kashintsev, who had just received a new appointment, junior physician in a remote infantry regiment. There were 5 of them. Having pulled the heavy station chairs around a corner doctor's table, they drank beer and talked with a forced cordiality and feigned liveliness, as if they were performing a farewell scene in a play. The handsome and self-assured Rule, his eyes unnaturally bright, posing and glancing around so that strangers might hear him, spoke in a familiar, foppish tone. "That's how it is, old man. Our whole life, from birth to the very grave, consists of nothing but meeting and seeing each other off. You can write that down in your notebook as a keepsake. Evening aphorisms and maxims of Dr. von Rule." Hardly had he finished speaking when a stout porter appeared at the exit doors. With the face of an angry bulldog, he shook a handbell and cried out in a sing-song voice, breaking off and choking, "Fire's bell. Kiev, Zmarinka, Odessa. The train is on the Sekouan track." And now, sitting deep and uncomfortably in the jerking sleigh, Kashintsev laughed with pleasure. The memory had emerged so extraordinarily vivid and colorful. But immediately, the tiresome, tedious impression of this endless, monotonous road returned to him. Since that morning, when he had stepped off at a small railway station and boarded the mail sleigh, only 6 or 7 hours had passed. Yet it seemed to Kashintsev that he had been traveling this way for weeks and months, that he himself had managed to change, to grow older, duller, and more indifferent to everything since last night. Somewhere along the way he had met a beggar, drunk and ragged, with a sunken nose and a shoulder bare to the frost. Somewhere a long, thin horse with a high-arched neck and chocolate fur, thick as velvet, had been stubborn and refused to be harnessed. Someone, it seemed a lifetime ago, had said to him good-naturedly, "The road is good today, master. You'll be there before you know it." At that moment, Kashintsev had been staring at the snowy plain, which was stained crimson by the evening sunset. But all of this had blurred, receding into some murky, improbable distance, and he could not remember where, when, or in what order it had happened. From time to time, a light sleep closed Kashintsev's eyes, and then his clouded consciousness heard strange shrieks, grinding, barking, human cries, laughter, and muttering. But he would open his eyes, and the fantastic sounds turned into the simple creak of the runners and the tolling of the shaft bell. And as before, the sleeping white fields stretched to the left and right. As before, the black, hunched back of yet another driver stuck up in front of him. As before, the horses' rumps moved rhythmically, and their knotted tails swayed. "Where should I take you, master? Straight to the post house, or to the inn?" the driver asked. Kashintsev raised his head. He was now driving down the long, straight street of some village. The packed road gleamed ahead in the moonlight like polished blue steel. On both sides, dark, pathetic little houses, crushed under heavy caps of snow, barely peered out from the deep drifts. The village seemed dead. No dogs barked, no light shone in the windows, no people were encountered. There was something eerie and mournful in this silence of human dwellings which, lost in the deep snows, huddled fearfully against one another. "Where is this, the inn?" Kashintsev asked. "Doesn't the master know?" "Mwasha Kotskal's inn. The gentry always stay there. You can have a samovar, fried eggs, a bit of a snack. You can stay the night, too. 5 guest rooms." "Very well. Let's go to the inn," Kashintsev agreed. Only now, at the thought of food and a warm room, did Kashintsev realize how frozen and hungry he truly was. Meanwhile, the low, blind little houses, buried in the snow, kept drifting toward them and vanishing behind, seeming as though they would never end. "When will we get there?" Kashintsev asked impatiently. "Soon. It's a great village 1.5 miles long." "Giddy up, little ones," the driver shouted hoarsely and fiercely at the horses. He stood up, whirled his whip over his head, and jerked the reins. A bright red dot appeared in the distance. It began to grow, now hiding behind dark, invisible obstacles, now emerging for a moment from the gloom. Finally, like clockwork toys that had run down, the horses stopped of their own accord at the gates of the inn and immediately lowered their heads to the ground in exhaustion. A vaulted, semicircular entrance stretched like a vast, black, gaping corridor through the entire house. But further on, in the moonlit yard, one could see carts with their shafts turned up, straw on the snow, and the silhouettes of horses under flat lean-tos. To the left of the gate, 2 windows, completely banked with snow, glowed with a warm, invisible inner fire. Someone opened the door, which shrieked piercingly on its pulley, and Kashintsev entered the room. White clouds of frosty air, which seemed to have been waiting for this very moment, burst in after him, swirling madly. At first, Kashintsev could see nothing. His spectacles fogged up instantly from the warmth, leaving him with only 2 glowing, hazy, rainbow-colored circles before his eyes. The driver, following behind, shouted, "Listen, Mavsha, a gentleman has arrived." "Where are you?" From somewhere, a short, stocky, fair-bearded Jew in a high-peaked cap and a tobacco-colored knitted vest hurried out. He was chewing something as he walked and fussily wiped his mouth with his hand. "Good evening, master. Good evening," he said amiably, and immediately began to shake his head and smack his lips with an air of sympathy. "Tsk, tsk. Oh, how the master has frozen. God forbid. Permit me, permit me. Let me take your fur coat. I will hang it on a nail. Will the master order a samovar? Perhaps something to eat? Oh, how the master has frozen. Thank you. Yes, please," Kashintsev managed to say. His lips were so shriveled from the cold that he could hardly move them. His chin felt immobile and foreign, and his own legs felt as soft, weak, and numb as if they were made of cotton wool. When his glasses cleared in the warmth, he looked around. The large room, with its crooked windows and earthen floor, was smeared with light blue lime, which had fallen off in large chunks in some places, revealing the wooden laths beneath. Along the walls ran narrow benches and slanted tables, their boards wet and greasy with age. A lightning lamp burned just under the ceiling. The back, smaller part of the room was partitioned off by a patterned chintz curtain, from behind which came the smell of dirty bedding, baby diapers, and some kind of pungent food. In front of the curtain stood a wooden counter. At one of the tables, opposite Kashintsev, sat a peasant in a brown tunic and a sheepskin hat, his shaggy head resting on his splayed elbows. He was heavily, helplessly drunk, his head swaying against the table as he hiccuped and muttered something unintelligible in a hoarse, strained voice, bubbling with saliva. "What can you give me to eat?" Kashintsev asked. "I'm very hungry." Kotskul raised his shoulders and spread his hands. He squinted his left eye and remained in that position for several seconds. "What can I give the master to eat?" he repeated with a slyly discerning look. "What does the master wish? One can get anything. One can set the samovar. One can boil eggs. One can get milk. Well, you understand yourself, master. What can be found in such a wretched village? One could cook a chicken, but that would take a very long time. Bring the eggs, bring the milk. What else? What else?" Kotskul asked as if surprised. "I could offer the master some stuffed Jewish fish. But perhaps the master does not like Jewish cooking? You know, the ordinary Jewish fish, gefilte fish, which my wife prepares for the Sabbath. Bring the fish, then, and please a glass of vodka." The Jew closed both eyes, shook his head, and smacked his lips with contrition. "There is no vodka," he said in a whisper. "You know yourself how strict things are these days. Is the master traveling far? To Husiatin? Is the master, if you'll excuse me, in the police force?" "No, I'm a doctor, a military surgeon." "Ah, the master is a doctor. That is very pleasant. On my conscience, I am so sorry I cannot get you any vodka. However, Etlya," Kotskul shouted, stepping away from the table. "Etlya." He vanished behind the curtain and began speaking in Yiddish, rapidly, as if he were angry. Afterward, he appeared in the common room several times only to disappear again, clearly in a great bustle. At that moment, the peasant lying at the table suddenly raised his head, his wet mouth agape, and his eyes glazed, and began to sing in a hoarse voice, something in his throat clicking and squelching. "Oh, tell me, would it not be possible?" Kotskul rushed over to him and shook him by the shoulder. "Trokim, listen, Trokim, I asked you so kindly not to carry on. See, the gentleman is offended. Well, you've had your drink, and that's fine, and may God grant you happiness. Now, just go on home, Trokim." "Kikes!" the peasant suddenly roared in a terrifying voice, slamming his fist onto the table with all his might. "Kikes, damn your mothers! I'll kill you!" He fell heavily back onto the table and began to mutter. Kotskoll, his face turning pale, recoiled from the table. His lips twisted into a smile that was at once disdainful, embarrassed, and helpless. "You see, doctor, what my piece of bread costs me," he said bitterly, turning to Kashintsev. "Now tell me, what can I do with such a man? What can I do? Etlya!" He shouted toward the curtain. "When will you finally serve the master his pike?" He dived back into the partitioned area, but returned almost instantly with a platter. On it lay fish, cut into thin slices and smothered in a dark sauce. He also brought a large loaf of white bread with a hard, braided crust, speckled with the black seeds of some aromatic seasoning. "Master," Kotskoll said mysteriously, "my wife found a little vodka back there. Try it. It is a fine fruit vodka. We drink it for our Passover, and so it is called Pesachovka. Here." He pulled a tiny, narrow-necked carafe and a small glass from behind his vest and set them before Kashintsev. The vodka was yellowish in color and smelled faintly of brandy, but when the doctor swallowed a glassful, it felt as though his entire mouth and throat were filled with a searing, fragrant gas. Immediately, he felt a chill in his stomach, followed by a soft warmth and a ravenous appetite. The fish proved to be extraordinarily delicious and so spicy that it stung the tongue. How do they prepare it? A cautious thought flashed through Kashintsev's mind, but he laughed it off at once. Recalling one of Dr. von Ruhl's evening maxims, one should never think about what one eats or whom one loves. Meanwhile, Kotskoll stood a little way off with his hands behind his back. As if guessing Kashintsev's thoughts, he spoke with an obsequious and gentle air. "Perhaps the master thinks this was prepared in some dirty way? Never, never in this life. Our Jewish women do everything according to the holy books, and everything is written there. How to clean, how to cut, and when to wash one's hands. If it is not done so, we consider a sin. Let the master eat to his health. Etlya, bring more fish." A woman emerged from behind the curtain and stood behind the counter, her head and shoulders wrapped in a large gray shawl. When Kashintsev turned to face her, he felt as if an invisible force had suddenly struck him in the chest, and a cold hand had squeezed his fluttering heart. Not only had he never seen such radiant, proud, and perfect beauty, but he had never even dared to dream that it could exist in the world. Before, whenever he had seen beautiful female heads in the paintings of famous masters, he had been internally convinced that such regular, flawless faces did not exist in nature, that they were merely the inventions of a creative imagination. And so, all the more astonishing, all the more improbable to him, was this blindingly beautiful face that he now saw in a filthy smelling of unclean habitation, in this shabby, empty, and cold room, behind a counter, next to a drunkard snoring and hiccuping in his sleep. "Who is that?" Kashintsev asked in a whisper. That, he was about to say, out of habit, the Jewess, but he faltered. "That woman." "Who?" "Her," Kotskoll asked nonchalantly, with a toss of his head. "That master is my wife. How beautiful she is." Kotskoll gave a short laugh and shrugged his shoulders with disdain. "Is the master mocking me?" he asked reproachfully. "What is she? Just an ordinary, poor Jewish woman, nothing more. Has the master not seen truly beautiful women in the big cities? Etlya." He turned to his wife and muttered something in rapid Yiddish, which made her suddenly laugh, flashing a row of even white teeth. She hiked one shoulder, so high it was as if she meant to rub her cheek against it. "Is the master a bachelor? Or is he married?" Kotskul asked with a fawning caution. No, I am a bachelor. Why do you ask? No reason, just so. So, the master is a bachelor. But why does the master, such a respectable and educated man, not wish to marry? Well, that is a long story, for many reasons. Though, I suppose it is not yet too late. I'm not so old after all, am I? Kotskul suddenly pressed close to the doctor, glanced fearfully around, and said, pointedly lowering his voice, Perhaps you, master, would like to stay the night in our inn? Please do not worry. The very best gentlemen stay with me. Master Varpakovsky from Monastirsk, the estate manager Lutsky, even the officer gentlemen come here. No, I must hurry. I haven't the time. But Kotskul, with a sly, discerning, and beckoning look, squinting first one eye, then the other, continued to insist. It will be better, by God, to stay the night, master. Where will you go in such a bitter cold? May I never see the light of tomorrow if I tell a lie. Only listen what I tell you, doctor. There is a certain former governess here. A sudden, mad thought flashed through Kashintsev's mind. He cast a furtive, thieving glance at Etlya. She looked out the frost-covered window from a distance, indifferent, as though she did not understand the conversation between her husband and the guest. In that same instant, he felt a sting of shame. Leave me alone. Go, he ordered Kotskul sharply. Kashintsev understood what the man was implying, less from his words than from the expression on his face, but he could not bring himself to be angry, though he felt he ought to be under other circumstances. The warmth of the room, after the long, cold road, had unstrung and softened his body. From the vodka he had drunk, his head spun with a quiet, sweet dizziness. The skin on his face burned pleasantly. He wanted to sit without moving, experiencing a languid sense of fullness, warmth, and light intoxication, refusing to think that in a few minutes he would have to board the sleigh again and face the endless, tedious, frozen road. And in this strange, light and blissful state, it gave him an inexpressible pleasure to let his eyes rest, now and then, as if by accident, as if deceiving himself, on the beautiful face of the woman. He thought of her not in abstract ideas, but in words, as if speaking to an invisible companion. Could anyone ever describe this face? Kashintsev said to himself, could one ever convey in ordinary, poor, everyday language these marvelous features, these tender and vivid colors? See how she is turned almost directly toward me now. How pure, how amazingly elegant is that line that runs from the temple to the ear and descends to the chin, defining the cheek. The forehead is low, framed by fine, downy hair. How charming that is, how feminine, how colorful. Her eyes are enormous and black. So enormous and black they seem painted. And in them, near the pupils, shine living, transparent golden specks, like bright glints in a yellow topaz. The eyes are ringed by a dark, slightly moist shadow, and how imperceptibly this dark tone, which gives her gaze such a languid and passionate expression, bleeds into the swarthy, firm blush of her cheeks. Her lips are full and red, and though they are closed at this moment, they seem open, yielding, and on her upper lip, somewhat shadowed, is a pretty black mole near the corner of her mouth. What a straight, noble nose, and what delicate, proud nostrils. Oh, my dear, my beautiful one! Kashintsev repeated to himself with tenderness. He felt he might weep from the rapture and affection that had seized him, tightening his chest and tickling his eyes. Over the brilliant, dark blush of her cheeks, streaks of dried mud were visible. Yet to Kashintsev, It seemed that no amount of neglect could distort this triumphant, flowering beauty. He also noticed, as she stepped from behind the counter, that the hem of her short, pink cotton skirt was heavy and sodden with grime, slapping against her with every step, and that on her feet were enormous, worn-out shoes with protruding pull tabs. He saw how sometimes, while speaking to her husband, she would give the tip of her nose a quick tug with two fingers, making a sniffing sound, and then just as quickly run the edge of her forefinger under her nose. Yet, despite all this, nothing vulgar, nothing ridiculous or pathetic could tarnish her beauty. Wherein lies happiness? Kashintsev asked himself, and immediately replied, "The only happiness is to possess such a woman, to know that this divine beauty is yours." A trite soldier's word. Possess. But what is everything else in life compared to this? A professional career, ambition, philosophy, fame, the firmness of one's convictions, social issues. A year, 2 or 3 will pass, and perhaps I shall marry. My wife will be from a noble family, a thin, flaxen-haired girl with sparse ringlets on her forehead, educated and hysterical, with a narrow pelvis and a cold, blue body covered in goose flesh like a plucked hen. She will play the piano, discourse on issues, and suffer from feminine ailments, and we both, like a male and female of some species, will feel only indifference toward each other, if not loathing. And who is to say that the entire purpose, the whole meaning and joy of my life, does not lie in securing a woman like this by any means fair or foul? To steal her, take her, seduce her. What does it matter? Let her be filthy, ignorant, undeveloped, greedy. Oh God, what trifles these are compared to her miraculous beauty. Kotskul approached again and stood near Kashintsev, thrusting his hands into his trouser pockets, and sighed. "And have you read, master, what they write in the newspapers?" he asked with polite caution. "What is the latest news of the war? It is all the same. We are retreating. We are being beaten." "Though I haven't read the papers today," Kashintsev replied. "The master hasn't read them. What a pity. You see, master, we live here in the steppe and hear nothing of what goes on in the world." They were also writing about the Zionists. Did the master read that a Congress was meeting in Paris? "I did." "Of course." Kashintsev looked at him intently. Beneath the man's outward, bustling shrewdness, one could sense something stunted and frail, speaking of poverty, humiliation, and poor nourishment. The most pathetic impression came from his long neck emerging from a worsted scarf, thin and a dirty yellow. Upon it, 2 long, strained veins stood out like thick strings on either side of his throat, with a hollow gap between them. "What is it you actually do here?" Kashintsev asked, overcome by a kind of guilty regret. "Well now," Kotskul shrugged with an air of hopeless disdain. "What can a poor Jew do within the pale of settlement? We scramble as best we can. We buy and sell when there's a market. We snatch the last crust of bread from one another's mouths. What is there to say? Is anyone truly interested in how we suffer here?" He gave a weary wave of his hand and went behind the curtain, leaving Kashintsev to return to his interrupted thoughts. These reflections were like those shifting, multicolored half-words and half-images that come to a man in the morning, on the border between sleep and waking. Those which, until one is fully awake, seem so delicate, effortlessly light, and yet filled with such profound significance. Never before had Kashintsev experienced such pleasure in daydreaming as he did now, softened by warmth and satiety, sitting with his back against the wall and his legs stretched out. A great part of this pleasure was centered on an indistinct spot in the pattern of the mottled curtain. It was necessary to find it with his eyes, to fix upon it, and then his thoughts began to flow of their own accord, smoothly, freely, and vividly, never lingering, leaving no trace, and bringing with them a quiet, tingling joy. Everything else vanished into a bluish, shimmering mist. The battered walls of the inn, the crooked tables, and the filthy counter. All that remained was one beautiful face, which Kashintsev saw and felt, despite the fact that he was staring not at her, but at that same vague, unknown spot. An amazing, inscrutable people. Kashintsev thought, what is it they're destined to endure next? Through dozens of centuries they have passed, mixing with no one, disdainfully setting themselves apart from all nations, hiding in their hearts an ancient sorrow and an ancient flame. The vivid, vast life of Rome, Greece, and Egypt long ago became the property of museum collections, became historical delirium, a distant fable. Yet this mysterious people, who were already patriarchs in the days of those nations' infancy, not only exists, but has everywhere preserved its hardy, burning southern type. They have kept their faith, so full of grand hopes and petty rituals, kept the sacred language of their inspired, divine books, kept their mystical alphabet, whose very characters breathe 1,000 years of antiquity. What did this people endure in the days of its youth? With whom did it trade and form alliances? Against whom did it wage war? No trace remains of its enigmatic enemies, of all those Philistines, Amalekites, Moabites, and other semi-mythical tribes. Yet this people, supple and immortal, still lives on, as if fulfilling some supernatural predestination. Their history is permeated with tragic horror and drenched in their own blood. Centuries of captivity, violence, hatred, slavery, tortures, pyres of human flesh, exile, and disenfranchisement. How could they remain alive? Or does the fate of nations truly have its own mysterious purposes beyond our understanding? Who can say? Perhaps it pleased some higher power that the Jews, having lost their homeland, should play the role of an eternal leaven in the vast fermentation of the world. There stands this woman, whose face reflects a divine beauty that inspires a sacred rapture. How many millennia must her people have refrained from mingling with others to preserve these marvelous biblical features? With that same smooth kerchief upon her head, with those same deep eyes and the mournful fold near the lips, the mother of Jesus Christ is painted. With that same faultless, pure grace shone the dark Judith, the gentle Ruth, the tender Leah, the beautiful Rachel, Hagar, and Sarah. Looking at her, you believe, you feel, and you almost see how this people, in its dizzying genealogy, reaches back to Moses, rises to Abraham, and higher, still higher, straight to the great, terrible, and vengeful God of the Bible. With whom was I arguing recently? Kashintsev suddenly recalled. Arguing about the Jews. Was it with a colonel of the general staff in a railway carriage? Or perhaps not. It was with the district doctor from Steppe. He said, the Jews have grown decrepit. The Jews have lost their nationality and their homeland. The Jewish people must degenerate because not a single drop of fresh blood ever penetrates their veins. Only two things remain for them, either to merge with other nations, to dissolve within them, or to perish. Yes, back then I found no counter-argument. But now, I would lead him to this woman behind the counter and say, look, here she is. Here, is the guarantee of the Jewish people's immortality. Let Kotskul be frail, pathetic, and sickly. Let the eternal struggle for life have left the cruel marks of craftiness, timidity, and distrust upon his face. For thousands of years he has had to scramble as best he could, suffocating in various ghettos. But the Jewish woman guards the spirit and the type of the race. Through streams of blood, under the weight of violence, she carefully carries the sacred fire of the national genius and will never let it be extinguished. As I look at her, I feel the black abyss of centuries opening up behind her. Here is a miracle. Here is some divine mystery. Oh, what am I? A savage yesterday and an intellectual today. What do I signify in her eyes? What do I mean compared to this living enigma, perhaps the most inexplicable and the greatest in the history of mankind? Kashintsev suddenly snapped out of it. A commotion had erupted in the inn. Kotskul was darting from window to window, pressing his palms to his temples, trying to make out something in the darkness of the night. With an expression of loathing and annoyance, Etlya was jerking the collar of the drunken peasant, who repeatedly raised and lowered his red, mindless face, swollen from sleep with puffy lumps under his eyes, while rasping wildly. "Trokim, listen now. Trokim," the Jewish woman said impatiently, her speech mangling the Little Russian dialect. "Sure." The police inspector, Kotskul, suddenly cried in a frightened whisper. He began smacking his lips rapidly, shook his head in despair, and, rushing to the door, flung it open just as a tall police official entered, freeing his head from the thick sheepskin collar of his coat as he walked. "Listen, Trokim, get up," Etlya exclaimed in a tragic whisper. The peasant raised his bloodshot face and, twisting his mouth, bellowed, "Oh, tell me, would it not be possible? What is the meaning of this?" The inspector shouted, his eyes bulging menacingly. With indignation, he threw his sheepskin coat into the arms of the scurrying Kotskul and, thrusting out his chest, took several steps forward with the magnificent gait of an operatic general. The peasant rose, staggering and bumping into the table with his limbs and torso. Something resembling a conscious fear flickered across his livid, bloated face. "Your Excellency, Master, dear Master," he muttered, swaying helplessly on the spot. "Out!" The inspector suddenly thundered in a voice so terrifying that the nervous Kashintsev winced and shrank back at his table. "Out this instant!" The peasant swayed forward and limply extended his hands, attempting to catch and kiss the official's right hand, but Kotskul was already dragging him toward the door, gripping him by the collar from behind. "You!" the inspector bellowed, his eyes flashing angrily at Etlya. "Selling vodka? Without a license? Harboring horse thieves? You watch out. I'll throw the book at you." The woman hunched her shoulders awkwardly, tilted her head completely to one side, and closed her eyes with an expression of pitiful submission, as if bracing for a blow from above. Kashintsev felt the chain of his light, pleasant, and profound thoughts suddenly shatter beyond repair. He felt awkward, even ashamed of himself for having entertained them. "May God punish me, Colonel." Etlya swore with passionate conviction. "May I go blind and never see tomorrow's light or my own children. The Colonel knows himself. What can I do if a drunken peasant wanders into our inn? My husband is a sick man, and I am a weak, poor woman." "That's enough," the inspector cut her off sternly. "That will do." At that moment, he noticed Kashintsev. Instantly, he threw his head back with a triumphant, severe air, puffed out his chest, and brushed his magnificent fair sideburns to the left and right with a sweep of his hand. But suddenly, a smile appeared on his face. "Basil Basilich, you old crocodile, what fair winds blow you here?" he exclaimed in a theatrically joyful tone. "God only knows how long it's been since we met. My apologies." The inspector stopped short at the table. "I believe I was mistaken." He smartly touched the brim of his cap with his palm. Kashintsev, half rising, did the same rather clumsily. "Forgive me 1,000 times. I took you for a colleague of mine, the inspector from Pochev. Such a fatal coincidence. Once again, my apologies. Still, the resemblance of the uniforms is such that, in any case, allow me to introduce myself. The local inspector, and so to speak, the wielder of thunderbolts, Irisov Pavel Afinijanik." Kashintsev stood again and gave his name. "Since everything has turned out so extraordinarily, allow me to join you," Irisov said, again deftly touching his cap and clicking his heels. "Very, very pleased to make your acquaintance. Hey, Kotskal, bring the leather case from my sleigh. It's at the feet under the seat. Forgive me, doctor, where are you headed?" "To Husieden. I've just been appointed there." "Ah, to the infantry regiment. There are some very warm fellows among the officers, though they drink like horses. The town is wretched, but for these parts, it is, in a manner of speaking, a residence. So, we shall be seeing each other. I'm truly glad. And you just now, witnessed the paternal admonition I was delivering." "Yes, in part," Kashintsev said, forcing a smile. "What's to be done, sir? What's to be done? It's just my character. I like to be a bit of a disciplinarian. I'm no fan of petty lawsuits and complaints and all that sort of rubbish. I have my own way of dealing justice, sir." The inspector was an imposing man, what provincial ladies call handsome, tall, with dashing sideburns in the Skoblev style that flared to the sides, and a high, white, serene forehead. His eyes were of a beautiful blue, wearing a constant expression of languid and somewhat unseemly, unmasculine, capricious fatigue. His whole face had a delicate, even porcelain-pink hue, and his supple, crimson lips moved and stretched coquettishly, like two restless redworms. It was clear in every way that Inspector Irisov was a local beauty, a fine fellow, and a heartbreaker, a former cavalryman, likely a gambler and a reveler, the sort of man who could go without sleep for 3 days straight and never be drunk. He spoke rapidly and articulately, assuming an exaggeratedly attentive face when his companion spoke, but evidently listening only to himself. "I'm a father to them all, but a strict father," the inspector continued, raising a forefinger impressively. "Put the case on the table, Kotskal, like that. I'm strict, that is true. I won't let anyone sit on my neck like others do, but then I know every one of my subjects, so to speak, by heart. You saw that little peasant just now? That is Trokim from Orakovo, known in the streets as the Tail. Do you think I don't know he's a horse thief? I know it perfectly well. But for the time being, I hold my peace, and then one fine May morning, click, and Trokim the Tail is removed from circulation. And look at this Kotskal here. A dirty little Jew, isn't he? But believe me, I know exactly what the scoundrel is up to. What? Am I not right, Kotskal? Oh, my God! As if the colonel could ever tell a lie. Kotskal cried out with obsequious reproach. All of us, every poor, miserable little Jew among us, pray to God constantly for the inspector. We even say to one another, why do we need a natural father when our kind, beloved master inspector is better to us than any father could be? You see, the inspector asked carelessly, pointing his thumb over his shoulder at Kotskal and narrowing his eyes significantly. The voice of the people. But don't you worry, I keep them right here in my grip. Am I right, Kotskul? What can I say to that? Kotskul shriveled up, almost squatting, and thrust his hands forward as if pushing away some monstrous, unjust accusation. We don't even have time to think a thought before the master inspector knows it all in advance. Hear that? Irisov asked curtly. Pray, proceed, said Sobakevich. He quoted, gesturing toward the open case. Will you have some roasted home-style duck? A magnificent duck. And this is Zhidovka, fish pastries with onions. Here is some rum. No, don't doubt it, real Jamaican rum. It even smells of bedbugs. And this, please do not laugh at me. This is chocolate. A lady's amusement, so to speak. I recommend it. On the road, it is the most nourishing thing. I learned that from sad experience, in the line of my thankless service. In winter, it happens that a blizzard traps you in such a place that you're stuck for 2 days and couldn't beg a crust of bread for any amount of money. But what am I babbling for? Please. Kashintsev politely declined the hospitality, but the inspector displayed the most energetic persistence. He was forced to drink a glass of rum, which smelled of anything but rum. Kashintsev felt sad, constrained, and weary. Occasionally, he stole a glance at Etlya, who was talking animatedly in a whisper with her husband behind the counter. Her fantastic charm seemed to have faded. Something pathetic, degraded, and terrible in its mundane modernity was now felt in her face, yet it remained as touchingly beautiful as before. Ah, so that's where you've set your sights, the inspector suddenly said slyly, chewing on the chicken and wetly moving his supple lips. A pretty little Jewess. Isn't she uncommonly beautiful? A delight. Kashintsev blurted out involuntarily. Why, yes. Fine goods. Be but. The inspector spread his hands, gave a feigned sigh, and closed his eyes for a second. But nothing can be done. We've tried. There's no physical possibility. One mustn't, though the eye sees it. Here, allow me, I'll ask him right now. Hey, Kotskul, come. For God's sake, I beg of you. Kashintsev reached out an entreating hand and rose from the bench. I earnestly beg of you. And nonsense. Kotskul. At that moment, the door opened, and the next driver entered with a whip in his hand and a cap shaped like a Confederate on his head. Which of the masters needs horses to Hugheston? The driver asked. But, seeing the inspector, he hurriedly snatched off his cap and barked in military fashion. Health to your excellency. Greetings, Yurko. Irisov replied condescendingly. Yeah, we could have sat a while longer, he said to the doctor with regret. It's once in a blue moon one gets to chat with an intelligent man. Forgive me, I haven't the time, Kashintsev said, hurriedly buttoning his coat. You know yourself, duty calls. How much do I owe? He settled the bill and, shivering in advance at the thought of the cold, the night, and the exhausting road, headed for the exit. Following a naive habit kept from childhood of making wishes based on small signs, he thought as he grasped the door handle. If she looks at me, it will come true. What exactly was to come true, he did not know, just as he did not know the name of the boredom, fatigue, and sense of vague disappointment that now oppressed him. But the Jewish woman did not look back. She stood with her wonderful, delicate profile turned toward him, brightly illuminated by the lamp, doing something at the counter with her eyes cast down. Goodbye, Kashintsev said, opening the door. Elastic clouds of steam burst in from the street, veiling the beautiful face and drenching the doctor in dry cold. At the porch stood the male horses, their heads drooping gloomily. They passed the village, crossed the river on the ice, and once again the long, mournful road stretched out with dead white fields to the right and left. Kashintsev dozed off. Immediately, strange, deceptive sounds began to speak and sing in front, behind, and beside the sleigh. A pack of dogs broke into shrieks and barks. A human crowd murmured. A child's silver laughter rang out, and the bells prattled like madmen, pronouncing distinct words. "The first thing is firmness, firmness," the inspector's voice shouted. Kashintsev struck his elbow against the side of the sleigh and woke up. On both sides of the road, high branches burdened with snow, looking like white paws, ran toward him. Between them, far ahead, loomed slender columns, stone fences and balconies, high white walls with black Gothic windows, the fantastic lines of some sleeping, enchanted palace. But the sleigh turned with the bend in the road, and the spectral palace vanished, turning back into dark rows of trees and canopies of snow-laden branches. Where am I? Where am I going? Kashintsev asked himself in bewilderment and fear. What was that which just happened to me? Something so large, joyful, and important? In his memory, with startling clarity, there surfaced the lovely female face, the delicate outline of the cheeks and chin, the moist, calmly passionate eyes, the beautiful curve of the flowering lips. And suddenly his own life, both that which had passed and that which still lay ahead, appeared to him as sad and lonely as this night road, with its boredom, cold, emptiness, and desolation, with its irritating, somnolent deceptions. In passing, the commanding beauty of a strange, unknown woman had illuminated and warmed his soul, filling it with happiness, wondrous thoughts, and a sweet anxiety. But already that stretch of life had rushed by and vanished behind him, leaving only a single memory, like the light of a chance station disappearing in the distance. And ahead, no other light is visible. The horses run at a measured trot, and the indifferent driver, Time, dozes impassively on the box.